Hello, and welcome to the Understanding Release Figures for Province Directors of Chapters webinar. My name is Emily Britt, and I will be your technical producer and moderator this evening. This webinar will be presented by Susan Pyle. Before we start the presentation, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone is ready and familiar with the webinar control panel. On the right side of your screen, you will see the attendee control panel, and on the left is the webinar viewer window. This viewer window will display the presenter screen throughout the webinar. The control panel can be minimized or expanded by clicking on the horizontal double arrow button in the upper left corner. It's usually orange. Minimizing the panel allows a better view of the presentation. Take a moment to practice. There are a few features of the control panel that the attendees should know. First, be familiar with the Raise Your Hand button. This button is located along the left side of the control panel. It allows you to virtually raise your hand if you have a question or if you want to respond to a question being asked by the presenter. Click this button to raise your hand now. Great. Clicking again will lower your hand. Another important feature of the control panel is the questions pane. To submit a question, type it into the question box. These may be questions related to the presentation or technical questions related to the GoToWebinar system. You may also be asked by the presenter to type your ideas or responses here as a part of an exercise during the webinar. Please send us a quick note in the questions pane now, telling us where you are viewing the webinar from tonight. Great, we have some people from Pennsylvania and Georgia, all over. Awesome, thank you everybody. Questions may be submitted at any time. These will be monitored and I will try to respond quickly or ask it out loud for Susan to respond to if we see something that shouldn't wait until the question and answer period. During the webinar, you may be asked to respond to a polling question or a survey. Please take the time to participate as your input and ideas are valuable to the group. Be sure to stay attentive and to interact as much as possible during this webinar. The quality of your experience depends on your attention and participation. Try to avoid the distractions of responding to email, checking Facebook, instant messaging, or working on other tasks at your computer. If you need to step away for a moment, do not close the GoToWebinar window, as you will be required to log in again if you wish to rejoin the session. If you experience problems with the audio, one possible solution is to use the conference call number and listen to the presentation using your phone. Click the Use Telephone option in the audio pane of your control panel to view the conference call number. The webinar is being recorded and an online archive will be available shortly on the KEPA website. Now I'd like to hand the virtual microphone over to Susan.
Okay, good evening, ladies. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm actually quite excited to meet, for those of you who are new PDCs who I haven't met, I'm excited to meet you next week. Hard to believe that ACS will be here already, but I'm excited to see you next week. We'll enjoy our time in Columbus together. In advance of that, though, this is one of the webinars that we hope will give you some foundation as we move into ACS and be able to spend a little bit of time doing some other things that are perhaps a little bit more in-depth. So hopefully we can get through this one tonight, and I'll be available certainly this evening as we go through to answer questions, but also as we are at ACS next week, I'll be happy to answer those questions. So to share a little bit about me to get started, I'm actually going to in some ways be wearing two hats this evening. I serve KAPA as a volunteer as the Director of Membership, and I'm in my first year of my second term serving as Director of Membership on Fraternity Council. I also have the privilege of serving in an NPC role with the National Panhellenic Conference. I am a Release Figure Specialist, and KAPA is fortunate enough to actually have two of us serve in that volunteer capacity. Colette Rangich, who is our Director of Standards, also serves as a Release Figure Specialist. It's also, though, important to note that while we hold these RFM specialist roles, Colette and I have been doing it for, 7 or 8 or 9 years. So those roles with NPC have really transcended what work we've been doing with KAPA at any given period of time. As RFM specialists, we attend an annual training that's hosted by NPC. There are about 60 of us that are release figure specialists representing all NPC organizations. And when we work with a campus, we'll get into that in a moment, but when we work with a campus, we are actually very much working from a National Panhellenic Conference perspective. And that frame of mind is important in the work that we do, that this is about the overall success of the Panhellenic as a whole, about bringing chapters to parity. It's not about doing what is best for Kappa Kappa Gamma. So we work with campuses that we're assigned to campuses, sometimes that don't have a Kappa chapter at all, and other campuses where there is indeed a Kappa chapter. Our affiliation, oftentimes in working with the campus professional, is not shared, so they don't typically know that we're Kappas. Sometimes they do, but again, just reinforces that we're doing this work as volunteers for NPC rather than wearing our Kappa-specific hats. So we're going to get into some things that hopefully don't get too complicated this evening, but I think hopefully will give you a really strong foundation to work with your chapters ahead and thinking about recruitment and what this whole thing is that we call RFM. But there are really sort of three crucial things that I want you to take away from tonight, if you don't really remember anything else. But the bottom line here is we want to hit the number, we want to trust the system, and that we need to provide flex lists. And we'll get into each of those things in a little bit more detail here shortly, but ultimately I want you to remember those pieces. A couple of other things about RFM is that it's only used on campuses and using formal or partially structured recruitment, so it is not used in a COB situation, for example. And it's also, I think, important to know that RFM is actually now in its 10th or 11th year being used as the NPC recommended system of recruitment, and is used on over 400 campuses across the country. So this is it. This is really the way things are done today, and for many of us is quite different than how recruitment was when we went through recruitment. And so I think keep that in mind as we go through this process, that in general it's going to be different than what we experienced when we were in college. So some basic tenets here of the release figure methodology. Generally speaking, weaker recruiting chapters, and we'll talk about what that actually means here in a moment, but weaker recruiting chapters invite back more potential new members so that they have a greater chance of making quota throughout the process. Stronger recruiting chapters will release more women earlier in the process, so they have fewer women who they are carrying along ultimately to preference round. Ultimately, the goal is to give each chapter a statistical chance of making quota if they follow their release figures that are given and their flex lists. That's our ultimate goal, is that everybody makes quota. Certainly, we want to allow and encourage the potential new members to investigate all of their options and to ultimately match with a chapter where she has a likelihood of pledging. We certainly can remember or are aware of chapters on campuses where there is a couple of strong chapters, perceived strong chapters, and everybody wants to be a member of them. Well, we know that that's just not possible. So number one, we want to think about chapters are sort of more than just a perception of being a, quote, strong chapter, but also help the potential new member really explore her options and understand that there are lots of great chapters on that campus, and allow her to build some relationships with women in lots of chapters as she goes through recruitment, rather than focusing on a chapter where actually they really ultimately will not have any interest in offering her a bid. And then ultimately we want to place as many women into the Greek community as possible. We certainly want to grow the Greek experience, and those numbers across the country just continue to rise, and which is actually quite an exciting thing to see. A couple of terminology notes here, just to get clarified as we move through the presentation. So I'll use the term all-in pool. And what you may hear that number in working with your chapter. If they are a chapter who is not such a strong recruiter on that campus, they may have to invite all in pool back each round, which means in order to have a statistical chance of making quota, they need to invite everybody back each round of recruitment. These are for the chapters that are, again, the weaker recruiting chapters. And we'll talk more about, if you have a chapter like that, how you work with the chapter and how they handle selection sessions and such. We'll talk about that in a moment. You may hear the terms ICS or Campus Director. These are the computer systems that a campus Panhellenic will actually, they're vendors that a campus Panhellenic will actually purchase or partner with to use to manage their recruitment process. So it would be the system that a PNM actually goes into to register that she wants to participate in recruitment. And then it's the system that the chapters use on the back end to enter their invitation list, to look at their numbers, to get PNM information based on how she registered for recruitment, the legacy lists, and then ultimately also Panhellenic uses it for bid matching and party invitation lists and the like. These are the two major ones in the market, is ICS and Campus Director. Intentional single preference, this is a little bit of a just a terminology cue here that we want to make sure that we use current terminology in working with our chapters. So back in the day, the terminology might have been that she suicided, but we want to use the term intentional single preference, and this is when a PNM actually decides that while she might have gone to 2 different chapters for preference round, she only wants to list 1 on her bid card, and so that would be an intentional single preference. Format, occasionally you'll hear as you're working with your chapters that they may be changing their format, and this may happen if they have a new chapter that comes onto campus or a chapter that leaves campus. So their format may change, and that's important when it comes to RFM. So for example, the one that's listed here is if there are 6 chapters on that campus, a PNM would go to all 6 chapters for open house, and then the second round of recruitment, she could attend, be invited to up to 4 chapters, and then perhaps 2 for preference. We like to see in a format sort of an even step down in the process, and through RFM we have some recommended formats that are used with the campuses, but that's something that we really work with the fraternity and sorority professionals on that campus to work through. But occasionally you may hear that a chapter or a campus has added a round to recruitment or taken a round away to adjust the format. Okay, so really some basics here about the release figure method. It's based on statistics that are from the prior 3 years of recruitment, and the statistics are things like acceptance rates, how many women, which is how many of the number of PNMs who was invited each round, how many actually elected and accepted to attend that party. Something called priority numbers, which we'll talk about in a moment here. And these numbers are given as an invitation number for each round of recruitment. And so the chapter may be informed that they need to invite 100 women back to the next round of recruitment. And so that's the invitation number that is given. As an RFM specialist, we work closely with the campus professional. We are literally on the phone with the campus professional through lots of different points of the process. We do this from the comfort of our own home, though. It's all via technology and phone and computer that we make this this magic happen. But we do have very close connection with the campus professional, although we are, in fact, actually running and looking at the numbers and determining the invitation figures for each chapter, and then working with the campus professional to then relay that information to the chapters themselves. I referenced a few moments ago that release figures are based on recruiting strength, and this is really important in to understand that recruiting strength is not a sign of overall chapter strength. So a chapter may be really good in recruitment, but not doing so well in lots of other areas of chapter life. And this recruiting strength is actually based on, it's a statistically based definition, and again weighted based on the based on the statistics from the prior 3 years of recruitment, with the most recent year being weighted the heaviest. So again, looking at those invitation numbers, how many accept, where they closed on their bid list, what their priority numbers, and so forth. So that all goes into a big algorithm to determine the actual recruiting strength for a chapter, that then influences how many women, again, that we need to invite back for each chapter in order for them to achieve quota. So to mention here, I use this term priority. And this is the number for PNMs after they finish that round of recruitment. So again, using that perhaps 642 format that we referenced earlier. She goes to 6 chapters, all 6 chapters during the open house round. After that round completes, the PNM will actually rank those 6 chapters, and if she can go to a maximum of 4 the next round, she would actually give, depending on the computer system, she would actually give 4 number 1s to her, those top 4 chapters that she really wants to visit the next round, and then gives a 2 and a 3 to the other 2 chapters. So the priority ranking is actually quite a strong, very helpful figure for us in understanding how a PNM really viewed her experience that round with that chapter, because it happens really at the end of that day. It's pretty immediate. So it's before she's gone back and talked to her friends or really thought about it overnight or those. So it's her in the moment thinking about what her experiences were with those chapters that round. So it's quite helpful to us in establishing how many invitations a chapter needs to extend to the next round or the next couple of rounds in recruitment in order to get to quota. We reference this year to year, so we can see that, for example, maybe a chapter had really strong priority numbers for that round historically, but then we see, for example, that in that specific year, maybe the chapter has struggled, and the PNMs, for whatever reason, have not ranked that chapter as high. And so it's helpful for us as a specialist to be able to see, wow, something happened in that round. Maybe they didn't have great conversation skills, maybe the membership chairman wasn't as organized that year, whatever it was, but to know that something happened and the PNMs aren't viewing it as favorably, and so we need to adjust their invitation numbers for the next round of recruitment. The preference round is really important as we think about the release figures. And it's important because we really, through RFM, ultimately can get the number of PNMs that a chapter needs to have at their preference in order to make quota, but it's up to that chapter, Kappa specific to us, it's really up to that Kappa chapter to seal the deal. They are the ones that need to have the meaningful conversations, talk about the values of Kappa, why this member, how they see her, how she would add value to the chapter, and so forth, to really seal the deal in the preference round and have those meaningful conversations. So we can do our part statistically to get the PNMs there so that they can make quota, but ultimately that chapter really has to seal the deal. I'll also mention, as we talk about recruiting strength, so the chapters who are stronger recruiters will have fewer women attending their preference parties. And that means that their bid lists are shorter and thus less room for error. So if a strong recruiting chapter, and we've seen this in Kappa, is frankly overconfident, if they're overconfident and perhaps don't present a strong preference round, they have a chance of not making quota because perhaps they coasted and the PNMs didn't feel connected, and then maybe too many of them rank Kappa as a second or third choice on their bid card, and so there's a chance perhaps that we don't make quota. So it's really important, even for those chapters that are strong recruiting chapters, to give their all and really seal their deal in the preference round. So I will pause there for a moment and see if we have any questions.
Right now we don't have any submitted, but if you have them, send them in and
Okay.
I'll shout them out.
Great. All right, awesome. We'll keep on chugging then. Okay, so a couple of other rules, quote, of the release figure method. So the first is that all women attending a chapter's preference party must appear on the chapter's bid list. So there are no exceptions to this. And we've certainly, as I've been director of membership over the last couple of years, had situations where a chapter, for some reason, makes a mistake, didn't realize, got a name confused or something, and they leave somebody off, and or get somebody on the list that they don't mean to, and now they don't want to extend her, they don't want to have her on our bid list after preference round. Or they certainly perhaps learn something about her in preference and decide, well, there's no way that we can offer her a bid. Well, in fact, she has to stay on our bid list. She may be at the bottom of the bid list, but she has to be on our bid list. The other piece is that chapters need to accept quota additions, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a moment, but this is actually a really great thing. These women, again, quota additions were on our bid list, so they attended our pref, and thus we voted to offer them an invitation to membership when we invited them to our preference round, and so we need to accept those quota additions. The important piece, though, here is that if there's any variation, if a chapter wants to vary from their invitation number, so again, if they're told that they need to invite 500 women to the next round of recruitment and they only want to invite 450, we need to talk about that. And they can call me directly, or they can call you and loop you in, or what have you, but they need to call me and we need to talk that through and help me understand why they want to do that. And in that scenario, I'm probably not going to allow that to happen, but depending on the circumstances and the recruiting strength of that chapter, campus circumstances, compelling reasons, then we may allow them to perhaps maybe only invite 485 or so. But the reason that we need to make sure that we follow these carry figures is that if there's an impact panhellenically, if there's a system impact if we don't follow those numbers. It has an impact on women who are likely to be released or withdraw from the process, or an impact to other chapters on that campus. So we need to be mindful of following those carry figures. Okay, so I referenced flex lists. So what are those exactly? So we've got a little bit of a visual here to walk through this. So in the scenario that I referenced a moment ago, let's say that our chapter is told that we need to invite 100 women to the next round of recruitment. So we create our invitation list. They're numbered 1 to 100. Again, this is how we would, with our Kappa voting methods, we would arrive at an invitation list that then gets entered into the computer in ranked order. We always want to make sure that the chapters understand what order the list goes in, so we don't get it upside down and get the list reversed, for example. But we get those women all moved into the computer, and the list is in there 1 to 100. So that's our invitation list. Then we may be told that we need to have a minus list of 5 and a plus list of 5. So in this scenario, the minus list of 5 is actually the first 5 women who are removed from our base invitation list if we perhaps perform better than we expected in recruitment, and those women are needed to go to another chapter's invitation list, for example. So they would be taken off in the list that we put them in, so in reverse order. So in this scenario, number 100 would be the first P&M to be removed if needed in this scenario. Sometimes not all 5 might be removed, but maybe only 1 or 2 would be removed from that invitation list. But they would start with number 100. So again, important that we get our invitation list entered in the right order so that we make sure that these are the first 5 women that would be taken off of the list. If it's not possible, though, for example, for the RFM specialist to decide, oh, we want to take 8 women off of your list. If they've given us only a list, told us you need a minus list of 5, they can't take 8 off. They can only go up to 5 to be removed. On the other hand, if we perhaps don't perform as well as we anticipate during that round of recruitment, the Flex Plus list gives us the benefit of a cushion. And the RFM specialist can add women to our list if needed, to make sure, again, that we get that number that we need to have ultimately to carry us through the process to get to quota. So this would be a list of an additional 5 women in ranked order again that, if needed, could be added to our list. And again, they would start with number 101, 102, 103, and so forth. Not just randomly pick of these 5, not start at 105 and then do 104 and so forth. So it actually would start with 101. So this is an additional 5 women that would be added as our Flex Plus list. And so there, again, yeah, first P&M to be added if needed is number 101. Okay, so let's look at this sort of in a little bit of a different visual here. So let's say in this scenario that that we have an open house pool of 45 women. Certainly, some of you are probably rolling your eyes because you have perhaps 450 women in an open house pool or 1,200 women in an open house pool. But let's just say, for the sake of argument and simplicity's sake, that we have 45 women who have come to our open house round throughout that day. So we are asked then to invite 30 of those came to our open house round, and we look at those women and ultimately pick what the chapter would determine to be the top 10 of those women, and again put them in a ranked order, those 10. So in this scenario, those 10 get moved down, and again you can see it here in a ranked order 1 to 10 for our Flex Plus list. To determine our Flex Minus list, we go to our 30 here that we've invited and identify the 10 women who, if needed, would be removed from our list. And from our Kappa voting, these would be the women who received the bottom scores. Of the women who we want to invite, they received the lower scores. So in this scenario, again, we've got our scores, we rank them, and again here have our Flex Minus of those 10 women to be removed from our 30 invitation list if needed. Okay, so that was lots of information about Flex List. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions at this point. If there are some, I will shout them out.
All right, awesome. Okay, so a couple of other points here, just to reinforce that I've mentioned why the Flex Lists are important. We need to be able to do this so that we can adjust for unanticipated adjustments in performance. So again, if a chapter does really well during that round relative to how they performed in the past, or not so well. And then also we want to be able to optimize the overall number of invitations so that we can keep the retention up among the PNMs in the process. Again, a couple of reminders. The minus list, as I referenced, is mandatory. Per NPC, per Kappa, it is mandatory. The plus list, Flex Plus list, is highly recommended per NPC. Kappa, as an autonomous independent organization, like the other 25 NPC organizations, cannot be mandated to invite a certain number of women, but it is highly recommended in RFM that we follow that Flex Plus list. So in Kappa land, either way, if we want to not follow these numbers, the minus or the plus, you need to be, the chapter needs to be in contact with me to grant those exceptions, and so we can talk through the numbers and understand the specific situation. Also, an important note here is that legacies should not be on our Flex lists. And of course, this is because our legacy vote happens at a specified period of time during recruitment that is noted in the chapter's standing rules. So that is a yes/no vote, and until that yes/no vote happens, they're carried through the process. So they need to not be in a space on the list where they could accidentally be flexed off before we've had the chance to have that legacy vote. Once the legacy vote has occurred, those women are either on or off our list. Again, so that if we voted her to be as a yes, as a legacy, we want to make sure that then she's not on the flex list and accidentally gets flexed off when we wanted her, when we said yes to her as a legacy. So we'll spend a few moments here talking about quota range, and this is something that's pretty different from when most of us probably went through recruitment. Back prior to RFM, there would be a quota that would be established really almost from the beginning of recruitment, and everybody would sort of know what that quota was going to be, and that's what it was. But now quota is actually not set until after preference, when all bid cards have been submitted and all chapters have submitted their bid lists. And the RFM specialist and the fraternity and sorority advisor on that campus, through the computer systems, will literally run bid matching at various levels. And that's the beauty of a computer system now, is that we can run bid matching in a matter of seconds. At a variety of levels to understand what's going to be best for that campus and where quota should be set. So in this scenario, we might say that the campus might hear, or the chapter might hear from the Panhellenic that quota is going to be someplace around 38 to 43. And as recruitment progresses and we see how retention looks, that number may flex a little bit, but that's the quota range. So when we run bid matching, we can actually run bid matching at all 5 or all 6 of these levels or more to understand what quota looks like for each chapter in that scenario. So again, this happens after all bid lists are in, after all chapters of, and all P&Ms have submitted their bid preferences. So you can see when we run bid matching, in this scenario, we see that every chapter on that campus makes quota up through 41, which is pretty great. And then at 42, Chapter K misses quota by 5. And then at 43, there are 3 chapters that miss quota by varying levels. So as RFM specialist, and as I'm on the phone with the campus professional, the fraternity and sorority advisor, as we look at this, the kinds of things that we're looking to determine would include looking at the number of unmatched P&Ms. And in this scenario, we also have broken down here by intentional single preferences and maximizing P&Ms. Intentional single preference P&Ms actually did not, what we say, play by the rules. So because the woman in an intentional single preference went to, for example, 2 preference parties, but only wrote 1 chapter down on her bid card as an intentional single preference, she's not playing by the rules and is not eligible to be placed as a quota addition. She may still be placed up here in regular bid matching. If she's high enough on that chapter's bid list, she may still get placed. But if she's not, she cannot be placed as a quota addition. So we want to encourage our P&Ms if they go to 2 chapters, to rank both chapters on their bid card, if they will accept a bid. If they're not going to accept a bid from one of those chapters, they should not put it down. But we see here in bold the number of maximizing P&Ms for each chapter, or for each level of quota. And we can see that, gosh, okay, so at 41, where everybody makes quota, there are 10 women who could be placed by quota additions, which is a pretty good, it's a decent number to be able to match and place sort of individually. We place them, we make decisions on where they go based on where they attended and where they are on the chapter's bid list. But these 2 women who were intentional single preference will not be matched in this process. So we would probably match quota and determine quota would be 41. There's a chance, depending on campus circumstances, that we might place quota at 42, though, because perhaps Chapter K is maybe a new chapter on that campus, And for them to get 37 in recruitment, their first formal recruitment, is pretty great. It moves us that we only now have 4 quota additions to place as maximizing P&Ms, or maybe Chapter K has been a struggling chapter, and maybe the last 3 years in recruitment they've only gotten 20 new members. And so for them to get 37 is a huge improvement and a win for everybody, and everybody feels good about that. So that's why we take in those campus circumstances and understand into play when we set quota. But generally speaking, the goal is for everybody to meet quota. It's a great feeling for a Panhellenic to celebrate when every chapter makes quota. All chapters feel good about it, and so the likelihood of setting it at 41 in this scenario is pretty great. They mentioned here the quota additions piece. So, do we have any questions? Good.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, here we go. There's one. So the question is, when would a PDC deal with quota additions?
Yeah, so you're just going to know that the chapter received quota additions. So this is really only for you to understand what those quota additions are, who they are, what that really means as a quota addition. You're not going to be involved in setting quota or understanding it, but when a chapter says, why did we get 3 quota additions? We don't really understand that. You're able to say, well, remember, those women were on your bid list. They came to your preference round and participated in the process, and they were matched as quota additions. Oftentimes, quota additions are placed based on how the P&M ranked the chapters, and so typically she'll be placed, if she ranked Kappa first, for example, she would be placed with Kappa because retention is higher if the P&M gets placed with her first choice. So.
All right, that was the only one.
All right, a couple of other tips to consider here. It's important as chapters are working on their voting that they focus their voting methods so that they can get enough of a good ranking of the P&Ms and the votes in those early first rounds of recruitment. In many cases, we're recommending, particularly in larger recruitments, that chapter may want to consider using a 0, 5, 10, 15 voting in that open house, for example, so that they can get more differentiation between the numbers of P&Ms and will have an easier time defining. And when they know that invitation number, they can get that break in the voting and be able to not have 100 women with the same vote tally and then have to sort of guess about who ultimately makes it on the invitation list and who doesn't. The voting method is really important, and as we move into a new organizational structure, I'm excited that we're going to have membership specialists who are going to be able to really dive into working with our chapters around how they vote to ensure that it's efficient and it's fair. We have some chapters that are just taking a really long time to vote, and there are more efficient ways for them to be doing it while maintaining a fairness and a good, thoughtful process. And so I'm excited that we'll be able to have our specialists be able to help our chapters really think about how they're voting. Certainly don't want to become overly confident. I reference that especially as it relates to preference, but just in general. We have great Kappa chapters who are really great recruiters all over the country, but we just don't want to be overly confident. We have to work at it every year and help the P&M understand the value of Kappa and how we can contribute to her college experience and her life after college, as well as how she can contribute to Kappa. And then lastly, just a note here about selection sessions. We always want to make sure that our favorite P&Ms are discussed in selection sessions, and so their names become known and helpful for conversations as rounds progress, and we can build the relationships with her. So I referenced earlier in the presentation chapters who are weak recruiting chapters and need to invite all in pool back during each round of recruitment in order to have a statistical chance of making quota. And one of the questions that we sometimes get from these chapters. Well, so I will first say, we know who these chapters are. As if you're a new PDC, as you're learning your chapters, this will come up probably in your conversation with your RDC. We know who these chapters are. This is not new to them that they have to invite all in pool to recruitment, throughout recruitment. But sometimes it becomes a surprise to a membership chairman who didn't understand that in prior years as she was sitting as a member in selection sessions and so forth. But sometimes the chapter will push back and say, well, we don't, it's not really that important to us to make quota. We only want to, it's fine to have a smaller chapter, but some of the realities of making quota start to set in if we miss quota for a period of time, a number of years in a row. So that means that we have a smaller chapter budget than everybody else on campus. That may mean that we have a hard time filling the house if we have a facility on that campus. It means that we have to work harder at recruitment all year round. We have to work harder at having a larger new member class through COB, which can be a challenge on lots of campuses. If we don't have the same size budget, that may mean that we're not having the same size or scale of social events or other kinds of chapter activities that other chapters on that campus may be having, and so it can be harder for us to sort of compete or be seen on campus or to tell the great things that we're doing in recruitment if we're not doing the same stuff that other chapters are doing. Certainly during recruitment, if we look smaller in size than other chapters, it becomes a stigma for us. So I guess my point here is that if we don't make quota and we start spiraling here and thinking that, well, we don't need to take quota this year and we maybe miss it by 5 or 10 and then we miss it again by 5 or 10 the next year, like we start spiraling and it's hard to make that up through COB or in other COB just in the off term or in COB following formal recruitment. It just gets very, very difficult for us to keep up. So we need to sort of stop that spiral from happening. So it's important that we make quota. I think it's also important to know that we have women going through recruitment who may just not be showing up well in formal recruitment, and if she's shy or just because you don't have a great conversation with her in recruitment doesn't mean that she's not really an outstanding, awesome woman who would make a great member for Kappa Kappa Gamma. So I get real leery of chapters who are sort of sort of have this high membership standard when we need to invite lots of women back and start sort of getting really nitpicky about their membership selection and really want to discourage that. Because these women going through recruitment ultimately got admitted to that campus and are probably pretty bright and talented, and we could probably find the good in them as well. Selection sessions, we want to make sure that we're focusing on, again, the women that we really, really like. So make sure that we're going to spend some time discussing those. Perhaps every woman in the chapter or can quickly stand up and say their favorite, their rush crush, as we used to call it back in the day. Talk about their favorite P&M and the 3 reasons why they love her. Or maybe they have posters hanging up around the facility and they all sort of share those. Or each rotation group talks about their favorite P&Ms or something, so that chapter starts to know who these women are and know the names, and so the conversations, again, the next rounds can be stronger. And we don't really want to have a chapter spending a lot of time in selection sessions when they need to invite everybody back focused on the negative. It's not helpful to their psyche, and it's not helpful ultimately in the next rounds of recruitment when they talked about a woman who they really didn't like or somebody didn't connect with, and then she shows up to the next round of recruitment. That's not really helpful emotionally. So we have to think about how we sort of flip these selection sessions to make sure that they're helpful for that chapter. If a chapter wants to vary from their carry figures or their flex list numbers and they're all in pool, they need to give me a call. So while we hold pretty firm on this and needing to follow these numbers for lots of reasons, I will listen and take in lots of things to consideration, and I'd rather have the conversation with a chapter than have you, the PDC, sort of be the bad person and having to say, no, you must invite all, you must do this, you must do this. I'd rather have them give me a call. We could talk it through what those individual circumstances are and help me understand and hopefully come to some agreement. Academic exceptions are also handled differently by chapters with all-in pool, which means um, if we have P&Ms going through recruitment who don't meet our fraternity academic standards, we generally grant them sort of a blanket approval for those women because we need to invite them back. And ultimately, if I allow a chapter who is all in pool to release some women, I want them to be able to make a decision about who those women are rather than having it to be for academic reasons. So, for example, they may have a real concern about the behavior of a P&M going through recruitment. Well, I'd rather them be able to release her, somebody that they have a legitimate concern about how she might behave in the chapter or treat other people or what have you, than maybe somebody who they really like who doesn't meet our academic standards. So, and I'd want to just sort of empower them and so they can make that decision rather than feeling, again, like they have to do something. So we handle that a little bit differently. And then lastly, it's just being aware of the chapter mentality in these situations. Sometimes, again, we'll have a membership chairman who didn't really understand this come in and want to release a whole lot of women when they really can't. But helping her understand that actually they probably have a strong sisterhood and really like being with each other in that chapter. And those women in that chapter probably wouldn't be there if it weren't for prior years when we had to invite all in pool. And sometimes they forget that it was actually, they're probably there because of this very process in years prior. Any questions on that or anything else?
We don't have any submitted right now.
Okay. Just a couple words here on something that's relatively new in the last, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years. We've seen an increase in campuses having secondary or upper class quotas. And this is on campuses where women who are going through recruitment who are typically sophomores or juniors and aren't getting placed at the same rate as a first-year student might in the process, they might establish an entirely separate upper class or secondary quota for these women. And for our purposes, Kappa's purposes, we consider a quota as quota, and ultimately we need to meet both of these quotas. It's essentially like a two-pronged recruitment process. So the chapter would be given 2 invitation numbers for each round of recruitment, 2 sets of flex list numbers for each round of recruitment that we need to follow relative to ultimately making both of these quotas. As I referenced here, quota is quota. If for some reason we don't make upper class quota, we can only fill those spots in the chapter with women who meet that definition of upper class quota. So it depends on that campus, but it may be that she has to be a sophomore, has to be a sophomore, junior, or senior, whatever it may be. We couldn't essentially fill it with a first-year student. So just, again, some final thoughts here that we talked about at the beginning of the program. Ultimately, we need to hit the numbers, so we need to follow those carry numbers that are given to us. We need to follow the flex numbers that are given to us. We need to trust the system. We need to know that it works. It's on 400 campuses across the country, that it's grown our Panhellenic community, that it ultimately leads to really parity in size for chapters on campuses, which is what we want. Ultimately, we need to provide those flex lists, and then bottom line, just give me a call if there's, or send me an email or something if there are concerns or we need to look at exceptions and so forth. Have the chapter connect with me. It's great if those conversations can happen during daylight hours, understanding that time zones shift and things, of course, but sometimes when those calls happen in the middle of the night, it's too late to make those decisions sometimes, but at other times, that's just the nature of recruitment, and those 3 a.m. decisions need to be made. So I certainly understand that during recruitment season that those 3 a.m. phone calls may happen. So, all right. Again, any questions at this point? Anything else?
Not right now, but if you're typing, go ahead and finish up that question and send it in. We have a few moments before we'll wrap up.
Yeah, and I'll just say here, if you're typing, just while we finish, again, I want to thank you. I thank you for stepping up into a leadership role. We need great volunteers to be strong province directors of chapters. This is a crucial role for us in the fraternity, and excited that you stepped into it at really an exciting time in the fraternity as we navigate into a new organizational structure. So I'm appreciative of your leadership, and I look forward to seeing you or meeting you next week.
Great. Well, we don't have any questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for the evening. Thank you to our presenter, Susan, for leading this session, and thank you all for participating today. If you have any questions or comments about today's topic, you can email the presenter directly, or you can talk to her in just about a week. If you would like to be more involved in Kappa's virtual training and webinar programs, we'd love to have you join our producer team. Please contact Karen Holmes at Kappa headquarters for details. It's a really great opportunity to give back to the fraternity in a cool way that doesn't even require leaving your house. As we close the webinar, a survey will open on your screen. You'll be prompted to respond to a few evaluation questions. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on today's webinar. Your feedback will help us shape future webinar training events. If you have any additional questions or comments whatsoever, please send an email to Karen Holmes at kholmes@kkg.org. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.